This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 369. Some interesting numerology going on there. It's the September 25th, 2018 edition. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you in the Brooklyn bunker. Muggsy, the handicapping Labrador, nowhere to be seen at the moment, but she'll probably wander down into the bunker at some stage, as is her wont. I'm trying to be extra high energy today because it needs to come completely from within, because the atmosphere here in New York, dismal. Pouring rain, very cold, feels like November out there. Couldn't even get Muggsy, the handicapping Labrador, out for the walk. She just took one look at the rain outside and said, "No thanks, pal." And I felt relieved when this happened. Had to get 3 espressos. It's a 3 espresso morning here in the bunker, but I got the energy where it needs to be. Excited to talk about some of the goings on in racing and in horse racing tournaments as well over the course of the next hour. Just one guest today, and he's the usual guest. He's the man who's got the skills to pay the bills. He's the people's champion. He's Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
Not much. Just hanging out. Very proud. Like I told you, I don't know how I pull it off. Walking in here at 9:58, 9:59 from different launch points. It's a talent. I don't know what talent it is, but I'm very proud of it. And looking forward to a good show. I got this vibe this morning that no offense to our friends at Parks, but that racing was kind of starting to ramp up towards these grade 1 situations. We got a great weekend coming up at Belmont, and then we're on to Keeneland for opening day with some great races for Fall Stars. And then the next thing you know, we'll be in Louisville getting ready for EquestriaCon and the Breeders' Cup.
I have my head already firmly planted thinking about all things Breeders' Cup. Going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show. Let's start off with what I think the top story is of the weekend, JK. And I'm going to go with the cotillion and with the disqualification specifically that went down in the cotillion. I have some thoughts on the matter. They've evolved a little bit. We were watching live together the other day, Midnight Bisou getting the job done with a 101 Beyer speed figure, but I feel like everybody coming out of the race talking very much about this disqualification. I'll just ask you point blank, was it justified?
Yeah, it was. It was justified. I think the problem is, and the frustration is that, which we've talked about and we'll continue to talk about every time there's a DQ or a non-DQ that comes up on the show. It's not so much the DQ or the non-DQ that is puzzling for us. It's the inconsistency that's puzzling. So in certain places, contact matters. In certain places, you can't herd. In certain places, you can herd. So it's just, and I'm really talking maybe like in New York, herding is allowed, and in Parks, it's clearly not. The inconsistency is the part that's hard for us to wrap our brains around, because you never know what's going to happen. And in those moments when there's dollars on the line and there's wins and losses and live pick 6s and dead pick 4s, when those moments happen and you genuinely do not know what's going to happen, it's very frustrating from a standpoint of I don't feel like other sports that are successful in this country and in other countries have so much wishy-washy gray area. Just take a stand, and whether it's the right or the wrong stand, let's take a stand. For instance, these roughing the passers that are happening in the NFL. It's clear. It might not be right or it might not be wrong, but it's clear. It's black and white. It's not gray.
It's an interesting analogy, and I think part of the frustration stems from the fact this is unbelievable to me what I'm about to say, and I guess it's possible it's a coincidence, but I don't think it is. I went to rewatch the head-on of the race and could not find the head-on of the race anywhere, almost as if somewhere along the line in racing, the powers that be think the best thing for racing is to not show the controversial moment, whereas in my opinion, it should be the exact opposite. It should be like the NFL, where you can examine the tape and hear people discussing hear the league itself discussing the decision that was made and why it was made. Whether you agree with it or not, there's a level of transparency there where in racing I almost feel like we go the opposite direction. How great would it be to have a head-on replay of that with an explanation of the stewards saying, hey, look, the jockey on the leader chases this horse all the way over the track, inside, outside, throughout the length of the stretch. We believe that cost the second-place finisher its fair chance to win. I would find that palatable comparatively to this, okay, here's the decision, let's move on attitude that racing seems to have, especially when, as you point out, JK, I don't believe DQ in New York. The things that we've seen that seem to make the DQ happen in New York, contact, coupled with the hurting, coupled with not being clear ahead, those factors were not in play here. I do think it makes sense as a DQ. I still didn't expect it to happen in real time, especially when just watching the second half of the stretch. It's really only when I saw the full length of the stretch that I realized the trouble I was going to be getting myself into in that situation. Who bet Monomoy Girl and is a fan of Monomoy Girl. I can't really complain about the decision, but I do feel like I can complain once again, as we have many times on the show, about the general lack of clarity, consistency, and transparency when it comes to these situations. Millions and millions of dollars on the line here. We have to do better.
Yeah, it's funny. I was doing some research for the show, as I often do, tongue in cheek, and and I was looking for some controversial situations in other sports, charging calls in the NBA Finals, the tuck rule, all these things. And funny enough, I went onto the internet and I couldn't find them anywhere. It's funny. The NFL and the NBA just got them wiped from history. So you weren't even allowed to see them, which is exactly what we do when it comes to these situations. Of all the races that are available at parks on Saturday, there's 13 or 12 or whatever it was. This is the only race there was not a head on for. That is absolutely.
You are breaking up a little bit, my friend, but we did get most of that. But if you do have an option to change your situation, feel free and take it now while I speak. That's surprising to me. I was sure you could go on YouTube and look at the tuck rule. Amazing if other sports have decided to take racing's lead on this, 16 years after the fact. That seems crazy to me that info isn't out there. I do think your example about the Clay Matthews situation, though, and the league coming out and issuing a specific statement about it, that to me is the right direction. Again, whether or not you agree with it, consistency, transparency. I know this is one of the items on the docket for the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation to be taking a look at, and I look forward to their reporting on it. I look forward to hopefully at some point in the near future this issue improving. Until then, as horse players, I think we just have to be frustrated, and you have to know that if you're willing to risk these dollars to bet, you're going to find situations where they're in the hands of your money's in the hands of people that you wish they weren't in the hands of. You're not always going to see the decision made that you agree with, or that really, I think, just being perfectly objective about it, the decision that should be made isn't going to always get made. And it's just something you almost have to price it in to your risk reward equations at this point in horse racing. And that's sad. And that's not the way it should be. And that's not something that's going to help handle. And in fact, it's going to hurt handle. And it's really something that's more than just a bunch of gamblers complaining. It's a critically important issue for the sport to get a handle on. And hopefully by people like us complaining about this and what I think are fairly rational tones, that'll just underline the need for it to be looked at more seriously and hopefully eventually corrected. What do you think, JK?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very hopeful that we'll get the situation sorted out. I don't know for sure if we will. I'm optimistic that if in my opinion, if the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation can present a quality and thorough paper like they did for breakage, and they do something similar to that for the steward situation, I think that it could get us going the right direction. Like I talked about last time with breakage, or when Pat was on, like one of the things about the breakage paper that I thought was so great was that there's this real sense of I know you might not fully understand this, so let me fully explain it to you, and then let's try to come up with a solution rather than me just telling you why I'm right. And I think that those are the types of things when there's a status quo that you're trying to get changed. I think there's a better way to go about it. We talked about it when we had our Twitter conversation. Banging your hands on the table and saying you're dumb. That doesn't really work. You have to do it a little bit differently. So hopefully we can get something done with it, because I tell you what, it's a turnoff, I think, to a lot of people that are in the game. It's a turnoff to people that are trying to figure out the game. And it just needs to be addressed.
Much harder to measure the economic impact of something like this. There's no sort of control group to measure it against. But sure as I'm sitting here in the Brooklyn bunker, it has an economic impact, and it makes it harder to attract people to this game when this is something that seems to be happening on. How many conversations have we had in the last 2 months about these type of issues? Make no mistake, its effect is real and deleterious. And hopefully, I think you're right, a really thorough dive in, explaining as much of the economic impact as is possible without the same kind of hard data you're going to be able to have for something like the breakage issue. Hopefully, it's something that can help. Speaking of things that we've complained about on the show in the past, looks like there'll be no action taken by New York State Racing Commission about the race run at the wrong distance. When this came up initially, my reaction was to be very cynical about it. I decided that rather just being another voice of cynicism, I would do a little research and try to propose a fair solution, which presumably has been discarded, any chance of which has been discarded along with this ruling. I'm guessing it's unfortunate, but I think as people who love racing and participate in the game, it's still right to, rather than just have the knee-jerk reaction that I originally had, oh, they're not going to do anything, blah, blah, even though that ended up basically being correct. It's more useful if you've got the energy, which I apparently do, to try to look at these situations and propose constructive solutions. It's funny, and I think your tie-in to Twitter is dead on, JK, in a sense, where you see so many people who, and there are certainly exceptions to this, but you see so many people who are outwardly negative, and then you ask them for a chance, and this happened. There was a very silly, writ small version of this week with conversation between two people I consider friends. Former colleague Josh Tepper, who, as much as I love him, he might be the nicest troll on Twitter. He tends to be very negative on there, and not only when I poke the bear about talking about how bad the Ryan Howard contract was. And Scott Carson, of course, more than a friend of the show, a member of the show, really. And Josh had said something cynical about the name of Equestricon, and Scott had responded to him, "Okay, you don't like the name. What would you suggest instead?" A lot of times, that's the best way to get somebody who's being negative to shut up, or at the very least, try to get something good out of them. It's like, contribute something at least vaguely positive, or, leave us alone. It's so easy to be super negative and much harder to propose solutions that actually might, push the conversation in a forward direction. Anyway, sorry, Josh, didn't mean to take your name in vain, but it just sort of came. I wasn't planning on talking about it. It came up tangentially, though, so there you have it. JK, your thoughts on this issue of criticism versus constructive criticism?
I'm a huge believer in you have to make deposits if you're going to make withdrawals. That's how I try to parent. That's how I try to, with friendships and relationships and the world around me. I feel like you have to have positive experiences with someone if you want to, quote unquote, make a withdrawal, and criticizing someone's actions comes off as that. So for me, I try to do that. I even in a normal conversation I'm having with someone, I try to compliment them. I try to admit something I need to do better, and then tell them that this is something that they should work on. I feel like it's a much more fair and even playing field where people don't get their feelings hurt or feel like they're being attacked. And some people might call that, not facing the problem head on. But I think there's just different ways with people and humans that you can kind of work with them. I believe the same is when you're trying to criticize a sport or you're trying to get there to be change. You have to listen. You have to understand other people's perspective and then try to educate them on why you feel the way you do and hope that they see the light like you do. I mean, but banging your head on the desk and screaming and pouting from the lower level of your mother's house, it doesn't always make sense.
So this what this was really about the other day when you said, Pete, you're a pretty good podcast host, but you should really quit these head-to-heads. Is this an example of what you were trying to get across to me?
No. But you should. But you're not the only. You're not the only.
Let's talk about the race itself, JK. We hate to knock jockeys on this show. I'm just going to say, didn't appear to me to be Florent Geroux's finest work aboard Monomoy Girl. It was nail on the day. Obviously, breaking inside, you could say, limited his opportunities. I just kind of wish he'd gotten out of there and been able to get wide early rather than make the move on the inside before tipping out. I thought when Mike went down to the inside, he should have left him in there instead of chasing him out of there back onto the good part of the track, putting himself on a worse part of the track. I just wasn't convinced that if he didn't just ride his horse, even with the tricky part of the track stuff that happened early on, that he wouldn't have been able to win. I certainly think drawn outside, Monomoy Girl wins the race. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Flo. I think I was probably harsh on Flo for the second half of the race, like saying he didn't need to do all that. He kind of did need to do all that. He was going to get run by if he didn't do all of that, what he did. I thought it was actually
really. You think if he doesn't just leave the horse on the Mike on the worst part of the track, you think that she still goes right by?
No, I think the damage was done. I think that we might have discounted how much better Midnight Bisou is at these shorter distances at a mile and a 16th, and I think she was going to run by her no matter what. Now, I do think he would have had a better shot of keeping her buried down on the inside, and that would have been a better move. And we talked about it yesterday. There's on JockeyTalk360.com. It's this website I've stumbled across with some really cool behind-the-scenes jockey videos. There's a video of Mike Smith when he won on Arrogate. If you've never seen it, it's great. He tells the story. He kind of narrates it as you're watching the race about how he was hiding from Victor on California Chrome. And he's saying, like, look, right here, I go down inside. Victor looked for me. He looked for me on the outside, and I wasn't there, and then I came out. So Victor never knew where he was in the race. I thought that was very next level that Mike was, like, riding Victor as well. And I think that if Flo would have rode Midnight Bisou a little bit more, it would have increased his chances, like you said, keeping her on the inside rather than shifting her to the good part of the track. But in my opinion, the race was lost in the first, 3/8 of the race. I feel like in the first 3 furlongs, like he should have tried to get out of that spot. And I know the horse broke going forward, and that's a really, I don't want to second guess it. Like I said, I've never been on one. And I don't know when he could have done it, but I guess if he could have gotten outside of that spot early, I think that would have made the difference. And she was game as ever regardless. I mean, she still barely got by, or barely held her off. But she, I think that the first part of the race is probably what cost him more than the decision to shift her to the good part of the track when they turn for home.
Fair enough. Who do you like in the rematch?
Well, I hope there isn't a rematch. I wish Midnight Bisou would run in the Fillion Mare Sprint because I'd love to bet her going 7 with that cutback and that late kick. I think that this mile and the 16th race reminded us how deadly of a kick she could have in these shorter races. So if they're going to both show up in the distaff going a mile and an 1/8, I want Abel Tasman. But I definitely want Monomoy Girl out of those two.
Gotcha. Interesting. Yeah,
especially drawn outside. And it's funny. Another thing that I noticed about Monomoy Girl we talked about is that I'd had this conversation because one of the things we talk about that we're not that comfortable with is like the breeding sales portion of the sport. That's probably our least amount of knowledge lives in that arena. And so I always like to ask people a lot of questions like, what does a good horse look like? Tell me what a bad horse looks like that's good. And I've always heard from people whose opinion I respect that Monomoy Girl, like if she was in a 2-year-old sale, she doesn't move very well. She's not like a pretty mover. And you could really tell she was very high-headed in the stretch and just looked really uncomfortable. But apparently, like, she always kind of doesn't look that great,
What's weird, I know what you're talking about from the race on Saturday. I attributed it to what I thought was a slow racing surface that a lot of horses didn't look good over. I feel like, just from my own 2 cents, that she'd looked, much better in her races before that. But I didn't see it as a sign of declining form. I saw it as a sign of a weird racetrack. That's my own 2 cents on that one. But it certainly seems like an area worthy of future exploration, which we'll be able to get some more data points on based on the workout reports we see heading into the Breeders' Cup. It wasn't the showdown. It was it was an exciting stretch duel. Didn't exactly work out the way that we wanted it to. From a sporting point of view, a rematch would be really interesting. That is a fair point you make about Bisou. I haven't heard about them doing that though. It feels like a rematch might be in the offing. Do you have any inside info, or are you just saying what you would do?
I'm just saying what I'm interested in doing. I would probably run her in the distaff too.
You're talking about it as a betting vehicle as opposed to as a racehorse, really.
Yeah, if I own Midnight Bisou, I think that from a broodmare standpoint, the winning the distaff would be a much more valuable scenario. She'll be looking for a new rider in the distaff, I'd imagine. Maybe Ricardo Santana for Asmussen, or maybe they'll go with another high-profile person, but I would imagine that Mike is going to stick with Abel Tasman.
Current prices for the race we have from a place that I think these are probably the sharpest numbers. 13-8 Monomoy Girl. Seems awfully short. 9-4 Abel Tasman. 6s for Bisou. 11-2 Elate. 10 Eskimo Kisses. Now let me take a quick look at the filly and mare sprint and see if those numbers are even up, and see what they are at a place that seems reasonably smart.
While you're doing that, Elate is not. I think she's questionable, right?
Yeah, these numbers oftentimes are not up to date with the latest information. Has she been ruled out for the season?
Not ruled out. I'm trying to Google. I don't know if she missed a work or something. I'm looking right now.
There was I feel like there was definitely some sort of setback because she was meant to run in the Beldame and is not. I don't know if that was
that's what it was. She was meant to run the Beldame, which is not.
I thought it might be the oh so trendy will train up to the Breeders' Cup move. Bisou not listed in the betting for the filly and mare sprint. That doesn't mean anything, but it just FYI. So that idea maybe is just that.
I don't think Elate's worked since the personal incident.
Okay, sounds to me like you're done. Not a barn that likes to rush to targets, a barn that likes to circle targets months out and point to them. But we'll see. Whatever happens coming from that outfit, I'd take it seriously. But it seems like that might be it for the year, and we'll have to see what happens next with her. I'm sure we'll have on that coming up in the next few weeks as the preparations for the Breeders' Cup get more and more serious. Breeders' Cup coverage launching in earnest on DRF.com. Lots of great content on there for folks to check out. Let's move on to the Pennsylvania Derby, JK, and talk about McKinsey's performance. Mike Watchmaker has an excellent piece right now on DRF.com that I really couldn't agree with more. Basically just saying that these figures in both these races we're talking about came back so strong. The visual impression of each race did not match for Watch or for me with how fast the figures came back. Again, I have this idea in my head that it might have had something to do with the specifics of the park's racing surface. But in the end, McKinsey gets the job done. A horse once advised at something like 25-1, or one listener even remembered higher than that, advised by you for the Breeders' Cup Classic, now into something more on the order of 5-1. The figure comes back on Bayer, a 107. It sure didn't look like no 107, but, he's a horse who should, in theory, move up off the break. let me put it this way. I'm really interested to see what the workout reports look like on this one going forward. My gut is 5-1 already. Going to probably be too short at this point to be of interest for the Classic. Claps to any listeners who picked up the 25s when they were out there. What about you, JK? Have you talked to B Squared? What are your feelings about McKenzie going forward?
I listened to B Squared on our often quoted Steve Bick at the Races show on Monday. He had, I always listen to that segment when Bob's on Mondays to hear him talk. He actually said, like, I don't know what we're going to do with McKenzie. Maybe the Classic. Well, maybe the Clark. I was like, come on, Bob. You're going to run that horse in the Classic. You're not going to skip it and run him in the Clark.
I thought he meant both. I thought he was talking about a 2-race plan. You could easily do both of those races, couldn't you?
I don't think so. With the Clarks, like, after, right? I mean, that seems kind of silly. Like, run him, you get him back, you run him in the Classic at 1.25 miles in the biggest race in our country, and then you cut him back to the mile, and I don't think so.
So you think he was talking? That's interesting. I read it differently than you. You think he was talking either or? We'd have to look on the schedule. They could be 3 weeks apart, which from Modern Racehorse amazingly is fast back. I thought they were maybe even a month apart, but maybe 3 weeks is right. I'll look into that while we talk. But why would your man be so circumspect about this?
Nah, I just think that's what that's what he does. He's the big, I don't make a plan and let the horse tell me where he wants to go guy. That's like he does that. So he's going to be in the Classic, and he's going to be bet in the Classic, and he's going to have a legitimate chance in the Classic. If, I'm not a old school, pattern sheets guy, but I know one of their whole thing is matching a number off of a layoff, and he improved the number off of a layoff. So you'd think there's going to be another jump here. He shipped across the country 1 mile and an eighth grade 1 for $1 million, and he won well with he was on the right part of the track, but he was outside and wide throughout. He got into a little bit of a battle and had to put some horses away. I thought he was extremely impressive, and you have to think he's going to move forward off of this.
That's interesting. I just didn't think the stretch run was very impressive. He's swishing his tail. Do you just put it down? I'm not surprised that you like the effort. I'm not surprised by the point you make about the figure. I'm a little surprised when you talk about, like, you think he was visually impressive in that race.
Well, I don't think that racetrack. I don't think very many horses look great on that racetrack. It's from what I've heard, I've never stepped on it or trained on it. But I've never stepped on a racetrack or trained on a racetrack. I've heard it's deep and tiring and inconsistent and all of these different things. And so I just assumed that he just wasn't a fan of it.
Gotcha. Okay. I just thought for a second you were saying something else.
No, but the 3-year-old champion didn't look great on it either.
Yeah. I mean, fair.
I don't.
And again, I'm not ruling out that that's possible.
Yeah. I think he's going to improve off that effort, and he'll go home and he'll train at Santa Anita, and he'll show up at Churchill, and Bob can win a race at Churchill.
I've seen that once or twice. Definitely, like I said, very interested in the workouts. Not interested at the likely odds. I'm going to just go ahead and say from here. But I think good workouts, good vibes would probably lead me into, at the very least, a defensive use. Not one that I imagine betting on the nose. That's all I'm saying. But it's a tricky race. I know there were some prices you wanted to look at, JK. Was the Classic one of the races you were curious about?
Always interested. The 5-1 is seems a little short at this point, but I mean, who's the favorite?
Accelerate, of course, 4-1.
Really?
4-1 Accelerate is far more appealing to me than 5-1 McKenzie. Then you've got Catholic Boy 8-1, Diversify 8-1. He'll be running this weekend. Another interesting one, Roaring Lion, listed in the betting at 12-1. He will be probably competing at Champions Day at Ascot, but I guess they're saying if the turf is too soft, they could spin that and come here for a tilt at either the turf or the Classic, depending. I mean, obviously that's not a price you want to be taking at this point. I think that's pretty obvious anyway, for the Breeders' Cup Classic. But yeah, those are that's what the top of the market looks like right now. A lot more information going to be coming this weekend in the form of this Jockey Club Gold Cup. I know that's a race you were interested to talk about as well.
Right. Well, you mentioned our friends across the pond. I thought I'd at least get your take quickly in between this thought about Alpha Centauri. I know you've been extremely excited.
She's retired.
About her.
She's done.
I heard. Yeah.
She's done. It's terrible. She had looked just so talented at Ascot, and apparently she just she didn't run very well the other day. There was some trouble in the stretch, but she caused it as much as anything else. And apparently just vetted out very poorly after the race, and they decided she's done enough. Very disappointing. And I wonder if it's just hard to know. At one point, it seemed like she could only go on firm ground. Then she won on soft. Maybe it was that kind of thing where even though she was good enough to win on it, there was some sort of negative effect coming off of racing on a surface she hadn't handled earlier in her life. Anyway, major disappointment. Hopefully, not too many listeners out there got stuck into the 9-4 price, which I never advised taking, by the way, but I did speculate might end up looking like value on the day. That bet's a loser, and we won't be seeing her. And it's just a crying shame. Definitely one of the most exciting performances of the whole year. A couple of the most exciting performances of the whole year came courtesy of that filly, who will now be entering her new career as a broodmare.
She's a pretty horse. I'm looking at her pictures right now. It's like a really dark, kind of a dark gray. She is pretty.
Yeah, she's gorgeous, and when you see her in full flight, the effect only gets better. A real quickener, had that real Goldakova-y kind of Mieski kind of look, and just unfortunately we're not going to get to see what she would do in the Breeders' Cup Mile. It's just it's a tough game. We got to appreciate these good horses while we have them, because. What's the old line? Like strawberries, they can go bad. They can go bad overnight. Your thoughts, JK, on looking ahead to the Classic or the Jockey Club this weekend? Who are some horses you're looking forward to seeing with an eye towards the Breeders' Cup?
I think it's going to be fun to watch Mendelssohn again with this new kind of, hopefully this new approach of being a little bit more aggressive, being a little bit more forward, and using him more in the earlier stages of the races and kind of putting his stamina into play. I think it's going to be interesting. At some point, you would figure that him and Diversify will lock up with, and one of them will have to do some proving whether or not that Diversify can handle someone that's going to run with him, or that Mendelssohn can prove that he's actually a quality dirt horse that can compete at the highest level over here. So I'm very excited to see that aspect of the race with those two at some point locking up, being forward types. You would think that is inevitable at some point.
There's some other big names in there as well you were mentioning to me before.
Yeah, Gronkowski is big name. I think is probably, no pun intended, is the name. I think that's kind of gotten attentions in that one little 3/8 run he made in the Belmont. He's going to get another shot to on the racetrack that he kind of has his best performance, and see how he handles that. And then also Thunder Snow is another horse that I think people are going to be anxious to see run. If he runs well,
that's the other one you were mentioning off air. You were saying, oh, there's somebody else shipping in, and you'd convinced yourself it was Gronkowski, and you confused yourself, but it must have been Thunder Snow.
Yeah, Thunder Snow. Yeah, so that's going to be interesting to see what he did. I think a lot of people will remember his performance from Dubai World. He ran off the screen with on a bias race, keep in mind. But Mendelssohn, I think, maybe ran okay off of that bias eventually. It took him a while to get there, but he'll have an opportunity to kind of prove what kind of horse he is, and I think Thunder Snow will have the same opportunity.
It's going to be an interesting race. That's a pretty interesting quartet of horses, regardless of who else shows up. We'll do it on Friday on this show. JK, production meeting in the middle of the show. Haven't had one of these in a while. Who should we get to come talk about these races with us on Friday?
Ooh, I guess we could reach out to our friend Nick Luck, who might have some insight when it comes to Mendelssohn and possibly Thunder Snow, and kind of what's been going on with those, and what the Rumbles are saying out over on that side of the world about those two. I think that he could be an interesting one. Or we could just go for a good old-fashioned American just to talk about some of these races coming up at Belmont. It's going to be a fun day. I think we're going to get an Imperial Hint sighting as well coming up this weekend, which I think a lot of people will be excited to see him run again based on the performance he had at Saratoga.
Currently 1-3 over there, Imperial Hint in the Vosburg. If not sure that you need to run to that. That might be short even for you, JK, huh?
That's unbelievable. 1-3.
Well, that's what you can bet right now at the one shop that has these races priced up.
What's promises for Phil?
He's not listed in the betting. He's meant to be running there.
Oh, you're talking about this weekend?
Yes.
Geez, okay. I didn't know they had an anti-post for the Vosburg.
Yeah.
Oh my God! I thought you were saying 1-3 in the Breeders' Cup. I was going to act like my phone died and call you back and get a flight to go to London and bet as much money as I can on other horses, but he's 1-3 in the Breeders' Cup.
No, I'll look at what that is. I got to scroll to a whole different part of the page.
You know what? I tell you what, that 1-3 might be a bargain because I don't think anyone's running. I'm dead serious. I don't think anybody's running against him.
Oh, that's funny. Well,
it's going to be like a break and win thing for him.
All right. Well, we'll see. I thought it was too short for you. Apparently, there's no limit to the amount of chalk that you will put up your nose. Let's talk for a second. Oh, no, let me throw this out to the listeners. If you have a thought on who we should have as our guest for Friday, feel free. Chime in. JK threw out some ideas. You feel free to have some ideas of your own. It'd be fun to get somebody in to talk about the big Belmont racing on the weekend. Give us your thoughts. You had something else on this?
No, I just wanted to say that, and there was the Justify when he ran in the allowance race in the mud. I was at Santa Anita. I was playing in the contest, and I had a $500 minimum I had to make, and I bet $500 on Justify at 1-9 to win as my.
Why not just bet to show? You're going to get the same price.
Because I couldn't do it. It was just too. I couldn't do it.
That reminds me of the story when at some point Duke Matisse was putting in a pick six bet for you, and there was one leg where you'd used all the horses but one in flagrant violation of the Rula rule for those of you who've betting with an edge. And Duke just went ahead and gave you the all in the race and explained when he came back. He said, "I'll pay the extra. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't place that ticket with every horse but one." This is your equivalent. You will not bet to show ever.
No, I'm sure there's a world where I will, but yeah, of course I'll bet a 3-1 shot to show if I'm trying to get to a minimum or whatever, but I'm not going to bet a 1-9 shot to show that I think's going to win. I'll just bet the horse to win.
I think that's wholly illogical, but it's just a difference in the way that you and I look at life. If the price is going to be the same, what's the difference?
Hopefully our buddies at the Thoroughbred Idea Foundation get the breakage situation fixed, and then it won't be so crazy.
All right, just looking quickly at the sprint, 9-4. There is one about that, folks. A little technical difficulty there. Not sure what's going on, but we seem to be back. We're just in the middle of talking about Firenze Fire, JK, who won the Gallant Bob. What did you think of that performance?
I thought it was a tasty performance. You see what I did there?
I am very impressed. Good with the puns.
I was going to say it was a biting performance, but I didn't know if would that have worked?
Not really. I think tasty probably works better in this context. Folks who don't know, describe the stretch run there.
Well, I was watching the race, and the 9 horse, who oddly enough I didn't know was a 10-strike horse. I didn't look at the program when I found out, but Marshall texted us after and said, we got a horse, he's a biter. But in the stretch, the 9 horse who was trying to get by Firenze Fire and didn't look like he was going to, it was almost like he was like, I'm not going to get by him, I'm just going to bite him. So he did his best Mike Tyson impression where if you can't beat him, you bite him. And he reached over to try to bite him. And I thought it was phenomenal. It was so much fun it's fun to see. This is a little bit kind of deep, but it's fun to see the personalities of these animals when they can put them on display. And that was just an example of a hard, tough, aggressive, type that you feel like whatever it was that made him try to bite Firenze Fire, whatever that thing was in his brain, is probably the thing that would help him dig in his next race and hold off someone trying to pass him.
Perhaps with a muzzle on. I don't think they'd actually do that. It's happened before. I remember when I was first coming into the game. I remember everything about it. The horse was called, and he was a sire in New York for a few years. Let Good Times Roll was the horse who habitually had this problem. There's, of course, the famous racing photo called The Savage, and there were some great images out there in social media. A number of photographers got good shots. I, of course, defer in these situations to the great Barbara Livingston, who had a good one. Firenze Fire, good enough, attempted bite and all to get the job done. All right, JK, plan out the course of Firenze Fire's year for me from here.
Wow, I mean, this is tough, right? I mean, let's see what Imperial Hint does on Saturday. I would imagine he's going to have an impressive performance. It's going to make him a big favorite. But I think it's important what's going to happen with Promises Fulfilled. The Promises Fulfilled shows up in the sprint, which I would assume he will, but maybe he won't. If he shows up now, he suddenly speeds it up, makes it a little bit quicker. Can we get some other cheap speed in there to possibly set up the race to fall apart? The other thing is that Firenze Fire's best race has been at the 1-turn mile, or in the Dwyer. So I have no idea. I guess I would go in the mile, in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, but there's a case to be made for the sprint if it's potential for falling apart.
You do. It sounds to me like you think he's best at the 1-turn mile, which is the situation he would get in the Dirt Mile.
Exactly. I just worry about but the pace could be tricky in the Dirt Mile, right? I mean, like maybe it's not going to be that quick, or maybe
Do you think he's a pace-dependent horse?
No, I don't think he's pace dependent. I think they probably. I would have said that before. I don't think he's pace dependent because he was pretty close.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
In the race,
I wouldn't worry. I think I wouldn't worry so much about the entries. I'd go where I think I could do best. I think unless something weird were to happen, I think I would probably just go to the Dirt Mile and hope for the best. And this is me saying that, not historically the biggest fan of the Dirt Mile, but I think, when it comes to campaigning your horse and thinking about the future, you got to take what the world gives you. And if that's where you're going to be best, even though he's shown some proficiency going shorter, now you're not talking about a grade 2 or a grade 3. You're talking about the grade 1 level. I think you need to have everything going your way to win a Breeders' Cup race. I think the best chance of that happening for him is in that Dirt Mile.
I don't disagree. I just, it's tricky. It's a great problem to have for Jason Service and the team. I tell you that much.
We talked before about a 1-3 shot you thought was value, so I can only imagine what you thought about 7-5 on our girl podcast favorite Uni on Saturday, JK, at Belmont. Did you unload?
No, it's one of those. It's these. When I'm home, I kind of, especially when I have Austin, it's hard for me to be in full racing mode, and so I didn't see it until it was over, and she won for fun, and it was wasn't even odds on. I thought she was going to be odds on. She was 7-5 or something.
98 buyer speed figure, easy win, impressive, imperious in victory once again for Uni. What do you make of her going forward? I mean, it seems like one who could probably compete at an even higher level and probably still has some big races to win.
Yeah, absolutely. I would think she's one that you could. I don't know what they're going to do with Sister Charlie and the other 17 horses that Chad has that could probably win the filly and mare turf. But I would think that, the mile and 3/8 would fit right in her wheelhouse. I mean, some of her best races were a little bit shorter, but she also ran well enough long. So She ran well in the Belmont Oaks, which is 1.25 miles. She ran well in the Lake Placid and Sands Point. So I don't think it's going to be a problem for her to get a little bit of extra distance, but maybe shorter is better for her.
Let's talk for a minute anyway about the Kelso, a race that's often an important prep for that Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile we were talking about. Pattern recognition gets the job done. Perhaps with the help of the right kind of trip. Loose on the lead, unchallenged, blue fractions, ends up getting to the line a length ahead of Sunny Ridge with Timeline and No Dozing, and Battle of Midway checking in behind that. Battle of Midway, well beaten as the even money favorite. What was your take on this one?
It's. I guess if I had to pick a horse that I wanted out of it, it would be a Battle of Midway or No Dozing. I just wasn't overly impressed with pattern recognition. Like you said, the blue fraction suggests that kind of got what he wanted, and he wasn't really ever pressured, and he didn't really extend. No one really ran past him, and so definitely not one that I'm going to be cutting in line to bet on come Breeders' Cup Saturday.
What did you possibly see in Battle of Midway or No Dozing that would make you want to bet them back?
I think maybe No Dozing is going to be better going shorter. So I think that I think maybe, I don't know if No Dozing is going to show up in any Breeders' Cup races, but I can see getting behind No Dozing in races that are short giving moment. And Battle of Midway is still on the come. I would need to see something a little bit better from him. But he's one that I'm not going to just dismiss, based on one bad race in New York.
Yeah, I feel like given all that he's been through, his heart just might not be in it. I don't know if you bounce back from an effort like that. I certainly won't be bouncing back from an effort like that with my money unless the price is just crazy in the exact right spot. I would put him on the one to oppose next time list, because I think that the famous name probably still means undue attention at the windows. But you never know the way these parimutuel markets work. It's possible he could be in some spot where he gets forgotten, and you could talk me into throwing him in some other combination. We basically talked about everything on my sheet today, JK, except for I got a couple little things left, but we definitely have time for a little tangent if anything comes to your mind. But I did want to touch base about the big one at Laurel, which went to the handicapping haberdasher, Joe Pettit, his second major contest win in as many months, following up his big win at Saratoga with this win at the big one. I thought the most interesting aspect of the story was this new format. I thought people would be interested to hear about, because it does solve some problems and some things that people complain about in live bankroll contests, namely the outsized importance that the last race can have when everybody's just pushing all in. In this format, it was live bankroll, but you were limited to betting only $250. In other words, there's no all in here. You can't bet more than $250 in any given race, and it certainly led to a more compressed leaderboard. What do you think of this format?
What I was saying is that I think I'm one of the people that believe that there's room for a lot of different formats. That's what's fun about this. That's why the World Series of Poker, that long week of all these poker guys coming out to Vegas and playing all the various games of 7-card that and 5-card this and blah, blah, blah. I think it's great to have different situations. I don't think that this is the answer for live money contests moving forward. I think it defeats part of the purpose of why they were even created, which is to create on-track handle. But at the same time, I get it. It's fun. I'd love to participate in anything with new rules. I think that that's kind of part of being a good handicapper, is being able to adjust and to kind of mold your game around the situation that you're given. It's a completely different approach. It's kind of a mixture between a mythical and a live money. But I also worry about, if you can only bet $250, I worry about a bunch of guys betting $250 straight exactas or straight tries and then blowing it up, and then you can't catch them.
Right. That's another, that is a concern. What I didn't like, the end game, which Joe played brilliantly, I thought illustrated the flaw in the concept, which is, in the last race, he liked a horse, and the right move from a game theory point of view was to not bet more than I think in this case it was $30. He didn't want to bet himself smartly, didn't want to bet himself out of that top spot. But I feel like, I mean, I get it. From a game theory point of view, rewarding defense instead of offense has a place maybe, but it just didn't feel exciting to me in the same way that really going for it is. Now, granted, I get why people don't like everybody pushing in the last race. I totally get it. But I don't know, maybe the problem was also maybe the idea of limiting the money is right, but maybe it shouldn't be quite so handcuffing. And I don't know. You also run the risk of creating a whole set of Byzantine rules that, become therefore impossible to follow. And you don't want to do that either. I thought it was interesting, but ultimately my gut is to try to continue to tweak it a little more, even if this is the idea you're going for. This seemed a little maybe too tight and too controlled to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd had conversations with people about why they wanted to do this, and I get it. But like I said,
explain the logic a little bit. I don't know if I gave it its full due. Give me a little bit on what the point is.
Well, I think the point is that the all-in move is often where funny stuff happens, where collusion happens in the all-in move, the ability to kind of partner with other people, and all that can kind of, it happens more, I think, more intently and more, it's more problematic for the rest of the group in an all-in setting. But when
I think it could still happen here. I think you could still, in a weird way, you might have more leverage. Like, maybe not more leverage, but like you were saying about hitting individual combinations of things and putting things out of reach. I mean, anytime you still need to police that people aren't making plays in concert. I guess I get why it's less likely to happen, and it probably is less likely to happen, but I don't even think it's a magic bullet for that. Do you agree or disagree?
No, of course. I mean, I would never recommend that the World Horse Players Tour do this. But at the same time, I don't think it's like tragic. But if every contest switched to this, I probably wouldn't play in very many. But I'm fine with it occasionally. But that's how I feel about Jim Goodman's rule too, right? Like, if every contest made you bet half your bankroll in one of the last two races, I wouldn't. I mean, that's a tough rule, but I'm fine doing it twice a year or 3 times a year. In fact, it's fun doing twice a year or 3 times a year.
What did you think about Woodbine's spin on that rule, JK, where you had to bet half your bank up to 2,000? What did you think about that compromise?
Works for me. Sounds great. No real opinion either way. I think I'm always, like I said, I'm always open to people trying new and different things and adjusting things, and there's no complaints there.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting to see how this big one format evolves, and they can take a look at the numbers too and see how it affects the amount of money bet on day one. And I agree. I don't mean to criticize to the point where I think it's like a bad idea. I just would encourage further experimentation down the line to maybe get to a place where this kernel of a good idea could turn into something even better. Because I think you nailed the correct point that, and I love making this point about contests. People can say, oh, I don't like contests because X, not knowing that there are 3 other contest formats where that isn't a problem. And there's going to be some players out there for whom this is great. And one thing that I also like about, I think it levels the field, people for whom money matters. I think that's, you know what I mean? You have such an outsized advantage in live bank contests, even our format, JK, in the World Horse Players Tour. You have a big edge if you're in a position in your life for whatever reason where that money doesn't mean as much to you, for whatever reason. And this format, much more like a mythical format, takes that away, leaves wagering strategy in it. I get it. I wish there was a way to just massage the end game where the correct strategy was to be a little more offensive than defensive. And it's also very hard to judge off one iteration of an event, right? Maybe I'm overvaluing maybe I'm overvaluing my own opinion here based on one running of this contest, whereas if they ran it this way 10 times, maybe there'd be hidden benefits that have yet to be seen. It is hard to say. It would be like, wouldn't want somebody to watch the World Horse Players Tour pilot and be like, these contests are impossible. Nobody hit anything in the last 4 races. Like, well, that was this time incredibly unlucky, where you had horses winning that most serious horse players wouldn't have been looking to bet. Going forward, it's not going to be a problem with the format, and I don't want to find myself falling victim to that kind of illogic when evaluating somebody else's contest format either.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's an interesting format. I'd be curious to hear how the churn went. But I think it also, it presents a different opportunity for players to show a different club in their bag, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I like your vision, JK, of, I think you said it takes place in a week. Actual World Series of Poker much longer than that. But the idea where you have all these different events and certain players are going to be able to showcase the skills that they have, the places where they do the best, and have the opportunity to skip events where that's not the case. It'd be great to see a day sometime in the distant future where we have an opportunity like that with horse racing contests. And I could definitely see some type of live bank contest like this being part of that mix. So it is interesting. And, kudos to them for trying to do something a little bit different. Closing thought from you, JK, for the day?
No, I can't really think of anything. I'm excited about Friday. Should be a fun show with the Belmont stuff coming up, so looking forward to that. And I can't think of anything specifically.
Go ahead, listeners. Send us via Twitter who you would like to join us for Friday's show. I'm at Looms Boldly. He's at UT Big Hair. You can also try to add the hashtag DRF pod if you'd like to. In the meantime, I want to thank Jonathan Kinchin. I want to thank producer Craig, Willie Nile, who sings our theme song. That's Dear Lord off his debut album. For more of his music, go to willienile.com. Travis Stone, of course, providing the voiceover, voice of Churchill Downs, the voice of the Kentucky Derby, guest on the show, and our buddy as well. Thank you, Travis, for that. Most of all, I want to thank all of you for listening, putting up with some computer nonsense today, some tech stuff. Apologies. We have some plans in place to get to a much better place technologically speaking in short order. Hopefully it's going to help some of these things, though. We're going to be traveling plenty. It's the nature of the game, and you're going to hear the occasional robo voice and drop out if you're listening live. Nothing we can do about that. But thank you for your patience. Thank you for your comments and enthusiasm. Always great to meet fans of the show out in the wild. That's it for me. We'll be back on Friday. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.